بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The first hadith which we are going to look at in this week's lesson is a hadith which can be found in Sahih Muslim, narrated by Fadl radhiyallahu anha, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has said, لا تحرم الرضعة أو الرضعتان. And in another hadith narrated by Sayyidah Aisha anha, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has said, لا تحرم المصة والمصتان. And in another narration, again narrated by Sayyidah Fadl anha, and again this hadith can be found in Sahih Muslim, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has said, لا تحرم الأملاجة أو الأملاجتان أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Now the hadith which I just recited in front of you, and the hadith which we're going to also look at thereafter, talks about fosterage, talks about how much milk a child needs to drink before we can say, or before we can establish the relationship of rada'at and fosterage between this child and this mother, between this child and this mother's husband, and so on and so forth. Now let's have a look at the second part of this particular hadith, narrated by Sayyidah Aisha anha, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لا تحرم المصة والمصتان. Now what does massa mean? Now massa is taken out from the Arabic word massa yamussu, which means in Urdu chusna, to suck. So the meaning of this particular hadith is that if a child sucks from its mother's breast once or twice, لا تحرم, there is no relationship of fosterage, there is no relationship of rada'at between this particular child and this particular mother. However, if the child now has 3 sips from its mother's milk or more, then from there afterwards fosterage will be established. That's what this particular hadith is saying. And then the second part of the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لا تحرم الأملاجة أو الأملاجتان. Now the word amlaja is taken out from the root word imlaj. And imlaj basically means the mother force feeding the child. Now you may have a scenario where the child has placed its mouth on its mother's breast, but the child is not drinking it. So what the mother doing is that she is kind of squeezing her breast so that the milk can come out and go into the child's mouth. That is called in Arabic imlaj or amlaja. And in this hadith is saying that if a mother is force feeding the child once or twice, la tuharrimu, there is no relationship of fosterage between the child and the mother. So 2 parts of the hadith here. The first part of the hadith is saying that if a child was to drink from his mother's breast, if he had 1 sip or 2 sips, it doesn't matter, there is no fosterage established. However, if it's 3 or more, then there is the relationship of rada'at and fosterage. However, in the next part of the hadith, it then goes to say that if the mother was breastfeeding her child and if she breastfed the child twice, then again there is no relationship of rada'at and fosterage between them. However, if it's more than twice, 3, 4 times, 5 times, then afterwards there is the relationship of fosterage between the mother and the child. Now let's have a look at this particular hadith, but this time more in terms of what the jurists and the imams have said with regards to this particular ruling and this particular issue. Now according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh is of the view that if a child drank a bit of milk, a little quantity of milk, or a small amount of milk, or even a large amount of milk, it's irrelevant, irrespective. I.e., what I'm trying to say is that if a mother breastfed its child a little bit of milk, or if a child was to drink a little bit of milk from its mother's breast, then automatically there will be the relationship of rada'at, there will be the relationship of fosterage, and that particular mother or that particular woman who breastfed that particular child, that woman now will become unlawful and haram for this particular child. As mentioned in the Holy Quran, وَأُمَّهَاتُكُمُ اللَّاتِي أَرْضَعْنَكُمْ, i.e. those women who have breastfed you, they will now become unlawful and haram as soon as they breastfed the child. So irrespective of how much milk the child drinks, whether it's a teeny weeny bit or if it's a large drum of milk, it doesn't matter. As soon as the child has drank a bit of milk from the mother, that's it. There is a relationship of fosterage between the mother and between the child. So that is the view of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh. The second opinion, which is of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullah alayh, he is of the view that if the child drank 1 sip or 2 sips from the mother, then there is no relationship of rada'at and fosterage. However, if the child drank 3 or more sips, then from there afterwards, that's when the relationship of fosterage will be established between the mother and the child. And the third opinion, which is of Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayh, he is of the view that if the child was to drink 5 sips, or was to have 5 sips or 5 kind of amounts of milk from the mother, only then the fosterage will be established. So these are the 3 opinions given by the famous jurists of Islam. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah is of the view that if a child was to drink a bit of milk, fosterage and rada'at is established. According to Imam Shafi rahmatullah, he is of the view that if the child drank 5 sips or 5 different amounts of milk, thereafterwards fosterage will be established. And according to Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullah, he is of the view that if the child was to have 3 sips from the mother's milk, only then the fosterage will be established. Now this particular hadith, you may be thinking, goes against what the Hanafi school of thought is saying, because the hadith is quite clearly saying, لا تحرم المصة والمصتان أملاجة أو الأملاجتان, where quite clearly the hadith is saying that it's only when the mother breastfeeds the child twice, or when the child has 2 sips of milk, only then the relationship of fosterage is established. Now according to Imam Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, he says that look, the actual cause for fosterage is that when a child drinks from the mother's milk, that is the cause, or that is the catalyst for the child to grow the flesh and the bones which are inside his body. And I explained this particular point in last week's lesson, that when a child within the first 2 years, the first 30 months, the main ghiza, the main food or nourishment for the child is milk. So what happens is that when a child has the milk, that milk is the catalyst for the child to grow up, for the child to grow healthy bones, for the child to grow its flesh and so on. However, 30 months after the child is born, the child is not just having milk anymore. It's having solids as well. It's having chawal, it's having roti, it's having salan and so on. It may also be having milk, but the roti, the salan, the chawal, these kind of things are also part of its diet, and it's also part of its nourishment as well. So therefore this ruling of fosterage is only established within 30 months, according to Imam Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, 30 months from the day the child is born. So if, say, for example, you breastfed a child who's 3 years old or who's 4 years old, then there is no relationship of fosterage between that mother and that particular child. However, within 30 months, if a child was breastfed by a woman, it doesn't have to be the mother, by the way. Generally speaking, it's going to be our mother who breastfeeds us, but you may have a scenario where you can have the mother's sister breastfeeding that particular child. So what will now happen is, obviously your mother's sister is automatically unlawful anyway, because she is your auntie, she is your khala, she is already impermissible, as we mentioned in the Quran. But what will now happen is that her children would also become unlawful and haram upon you. Because normally, generally speaking, your khala, your auntie's offspring, like just say for example your auntie has a daughter, you're allowed to marry her. Why? Because she's your cousin sister, you can marry her. But just say for example, if your auntie breastfed you, then what will happen is that not only would your auntie, obviously your auntie is unlawful anyway from before, but your auntie now has become like your foster mother. So she is unlawful for you, but similarly her children will now become like your foster brothers, foster sisters. And you're not allowed to marry your foster brothers, you're not allowed to marry your foster sisters. So that is the ruling, that what happens is that when a child is breastfed by a mother, then, as I was explaining, that it has to happen within 30 months. And also at the same time, because the catalyst was the milk, so therefore because we do not know how much amount is the cause for the growth of the bones, of the growth of the flesh in that particular baby or child, that's why Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi is of the view that if a child was to drink a bit of milk, a sip of milk from the mother or any particular woman, then automatically there will be the relationship of rada'at and fosterage, which will then entail that you are not allowed to marry that particular woman ever. Similarly, her offspring, like if she has a daughter, then that daughter will be now considered to be your foster sister. You will not be allowed to marry her. That woman who breastfed you, her husband will also become haram if the child happens to be a daughter, and so on and so forth. These rulings we looked at in last week's lesson. But what we can gather from this particular hadith and the Hanafi interpretation of this particular hadith is that if you drink a bit of milk, a mother breastfed a child, even a teeny drop of milk, as soon as it goes down the child's mouth, that's it. That particular woman has now become your foster mother. Now this takes me on to another ruling with regards to freezing breast milk and then feeding the child. Would the same ruling apply? Now, what normally happens in particular for the same way you have blood banks, you can also have milk banks as well. The same way people donate their blood to a particular donor, similarly women also donate their breast milk to a hospital. And what can happen is, say for example, if a mother has given birth to a child, and just say the mother is really, really ill, just say her situation is critical, so sometimes what they could do is that the child, just say for example, is not taking the Cowell-Gates and the normal formula milk, the hospital could sometimes use the milk from the milk bank and then give it to the child. Now the ruling is that what will happen in that situation, would rada'at, would fosterage be established or not? So the answer is that yes, it will. So even though you don't know who the actual person is, but it is actually quite good that if you can try to, get some details from the hospital regarding who actually donated the milk. If it's impossible, then then obviously you're not mukallaf, you're not subjected to that. But obviously what happens is that if that milk bank, the child was to drink from that particular milk bank, or the milk which was donated to that particular milk bank, and from there some milk was given to the child, then the same ruling will also apply in terms of there will be a foster relationship between the women who donated the milk into the milk bank and between that child who also drank from that particular milk bank as well. So what I'm trying to say is that even later on, if say, for example, a woman frees her breast milk and then later on she then gave it to the child, that will also establish rada'at and fosterage as well. So what we can gather from this particular hadith and from what I explained in last week's lesson is that your foster mother, they are considered unlawful and haram. It is mentioned in the Holy Quran, and according to the interpretation of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, he is of the view that if a mother was to breastfeed a bit of milk to the child, automatically there will be rada'at established, fosterage established between the child and that mother who breastfed or who gave her milk to that particular child. The second hadith which we're going to look at, that concludes the first hadith. The second hadith which we're going to look at is a hadith narrated by, or which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, and it concerns an incident which happened regarding a companion whose name was Uqba bin Harith radhiyallahu anhu. Now the hadith goes on to say that Uqba bin Harith radhiyallahu anhu, he married the daughter of Abu Ihab. So there was another companion whose name was Abu Ihab. He had a daughter, and this companion Uqba bin Harith radhiyallahu anhu married her. All of a sudden, so after they did the nikah, after they did the marriage, فَأَتَتْ إِمْرَأَةٌ, a woman comes and she says, قَدْ أَرْضَعْتُ أُقْبَى وَالَّتِي تَزَوَّجَ بِهَا, which means that I breastfed Uqba and the girl and the woman he married. So they got married, and then a woman comes and she says to Uqba bin Harith radhiyallahu anhu that when you were young, when you were a baby, when you were a child, I breastfed you, and the woman and the girl who you have married, I also breastfed her, which basically made them foster brothers and sisters. And the same way, you're not allowed to marry your sister through lineage, nasabi behen. Similarly, you're not allowed to marry your razai behen. So they now become brothers and sisters, foster brothers and sisters. So Uqba, he heard this, he got a bit shocked. So he then said to the woman, مَا أَعْلَمُ أَنَّكِ قَدْ أَرْضَعْتِنِي وَلَا أَخْبَرْتِنِي, which means that I am not aware, or I am unaware that you have breastfed me, and similarly, no one has informed me that you have breastfed me and my wife. So what happened? Uqba bin Harith radhiyallahu anhu, he then sent a messenger to go to his father-in-law, Abu Ihab, the daughter who he married. So he sent a messenger to go to his father-in-law, Abu Ihab, and ask him regarding whether I and his daughter, the girl who I have married, are we foster brothers and sisters? Were we breastfed by the same woman? Now the messenger, he went to Abu Ihab. Again, Abu Ihab then replied by saying, مَا عَلِمْنَا أَرْضَعَتْ صَاحِبَتَنَا, which means that I am unaware of this particular woman breastfeeding you, صَاحِبَتَنَا, and also breastfeeding my daughter. So basically, Uqba bin Harith he asked two people already, well not two people, he was asking himself, he said, well I'm unaware, and also he asked his father-in-law that did us two were breastfed by the same woman? He replied no. So what happened? Uqba bin Harith radhiyallahu anhu فَرَكِبَ إِلَى النَّبِيِّ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم بِالْمَدِينَةِ. He then traveled to Medina Munawwara to meet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He then asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said these words, كَيْفَ وَقَدْ قِيلَ. كَيْفَ وَقَدْ قِيلَ, which means, how can you stay with her when somebody told you such a thing? كَيْفَ وَقَدْ قِيلَ. Just say, for example, if somebody was to knock on your door and say that this girl who you married, she's your sister, or she's your foster sister. Now when somebody gives you that thought in your mind, you think, you know what, I think it's best I don't stay with her, because there's a possibility that she could be your sister. And obviously, you don't want to obviously be intimate and these kind of things with your own sister, do you? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him that, look, كَيْفَ وَقَدْ قِيلَ. Which means that how can he now stay with her when this woman has told you that you and her are now foster brothers and sisters? It's against logic, it's against fitrah, it's against nature, it's against haya, it's against modesty. So what happened? فَفَارَقَهَا Uqba bin Harith bin Anhu separated himself from her, he divorced her, وَلَكَهَتْ زَوْجًا غَيْرًا, and Uqba bin Harith bin Anhu's ex-wife, the daughter of Abu Ihab, she thereafterwards married another husband. وَلَكَهَتْ زَوْجًا غَيْرًا. Now, a couple of things to point out from this particular hadith. The first thing which we can derive from this hadith is that, first and foremost, when somebody was to give you such an information, then it's always important that you investigate. Mentioned the Quran, in ja'akum fasikum binaba'in fatabayyanu, which basically means that if somebody comes and tells you that you and her are brothers and sisters, you should first and foremost investigate that. فَتَبَيَّنُوا. Search for it, search for the truth, derive that whether this particular information is true or not. And this order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just restricted to this information about whether the wife and the husband, whether they're brothers or sisters. It goes for every single conduct and for every single transaction or for every single information. What we should always do is search and find out whether this information is true or not. And wallahi, if we were to act upon this Quranic verse, I could guarantee you that there will be no conflict, there will be no kind of problem, there will be no kind of hasad and hatred within our community. Because what normally happens is that somebody will come and will say, oh, such and such a person is like this, Abdul Rahman is like this. And you, without investigating that particular information, you then say, yeah, Abdul Rahman is like this. And then you start believing in what he said without investigating. Sometimes it happens that somebody will come to you and will say, oh, such and such an imam who gives the khutbah, who gives the sermon, he's like this. And then you, without investigating, then think, yeah, the Imam Sahib is like this, and then you start having some hatred or having some kind of malice against the Imam. Whereas in reality, the Imam is not like that. Whereas in reality, Abdul Rahman is not like that. Whereas in reality, Zainab or Fatima is not like that. But what you've done, and this is a prohibition, this is something which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited from, you've acted upon qila wa qal. Qila wa qal, which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited from, is basically random information. Oh, Abdul Rahman is like this. Zayd is like that. Fatima is like that. Zainab is like that. You, without doing any tahqiq and without doing any investigation, you just said, yeah, Abdul Rahman is like this. So first and foremost, what you should do whenever you get any information about a nikah, about marriage, about divorce or anything, or about an individual's characteristics or his akhlaq or his manners or his character, first and foremost it's important that you yourself do tahqiq. You yourself investigate and find out the truth, and then you act upon whichever one you want. That's number one. That's the first point which we can gather from this hadith. Now the second point which we can gather from this particular hadith is that according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, if somebody was to come and tell you that the woman which you have married, she's your sister, you don't have to believe in that information, you don't have to believe in that person, you don't have to believe in that man or in that woman, unless two men or one man or two women testify that you and her are brothers and sisters. That's the Hanafi interpretation, or that's the Hanafi ruling, is that somebody comes and says you are brothers and sisters, you don't listen to them. Somebody comes and claims that, or this is my book, you don't listen to them. Somebody comes and says, oh, this is my mobile phone, you don't have to believe in them unless they bring evidence. And the evidence and the proof which they have to bring is either two men who will testify that yes, this book belongs to Abdul Rahman, or this mobile phone belongs to Abdul Rahman, or that this husband and wife, they're not in reality husband and wife, but they are brothers and sisters, unless two men or one man or two women testify that they are brothers and sisters, only then we will take their information. Now you may then say, well, in this hadith, why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tell Uqba bin Harith radiallahu anhu to divorce his wife, bearing in mind, فَأَتَتْ إِمْرَأَةٌ, only one woman came and said that you are brothers and sisters, you are foster brothers and sisters. So the reply which we give to this particular hadith is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling Uqba bin Harith radiallahu anhu to divorce his wife was done out of ihtiyat, was done out of precaution. He didn't have to, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that, look, when a woman has said this, that you two are brothers and sisters, how can you now share the same bed with this particular woman? How can you now be intimate with this particular woman? So therefore, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam advised him, that it's best that you kind of separate, but you didn't have to. Why? Because you have to have two men or one man or two women to effect separation if it's basically based on foster brothers and sisters. Obviously what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him was basically out of ihtiyat and out of precaution. Now I'll just mention a few things with regards to testimony. Now, to keep this in mind that there are different levels of ahkam or rulings in Islam. There are certain rulings such as adultery or fornication where you require 4 male testimonies. You require 4 male witnesses. And it's mentioned in the books of fiqh that the 4 male witnesses, they have to be righteous, they have to be pious, and they have actually seen with their own eyes what went on between the man and woman when it comes to fornication, when it comes to adultery. Then after fornication or adultery, other kind of penal punishment such as stealing or thieving or someone who has drank alcohol or someone who has taken drugs, then the ruling is that there has to be 2 male witnesses. Just an example, somebody has stolen something, you can't just rely on one person's information. There has to be 2 Muslim men who have seen that person stealing from another person before you can establish the crime. And if it's for something like drinking alcohol or taking drugs, again you need to have 2 Muslim males, 2 Muslim men who testify, who give shahadat, who testify that this person has drank alcohol, this person has taken drugs. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is, again, this is also very right within our community as well, that randomly some people will say, oh, such a person has drank alcohol. Such a person takes drugs. Again, as I mentioned, فَتَبَيَّنُوا, you need to investigate that what these people are saying, such people are taking alcohol, they're taking drugs, they're consuming alcohol. Are they in reality taking alcohol, or is it one of those kind of vicious rumors which people are making about that individual? So again, you should ask that brother, okay, you're saying this person is taking alcohol or taking drugs. You bring somebody else who has seen him take alcohol or you have seen him take drugs, then I will believe in you, then I'll listen to you. Exactly same goes with thieving as well. Sometimes what happens in particular when people are working in a shop, and sometimes it happens as well when people are working within the masajid, like one trustee accuses another trustee, oh, you've been stealing the donation money. Just randomly. And when they actually do the investigation at that time, they realize that it's actually baseless, and because one trustee didn't like the other one, he just falsely accused him of thieving. So again, when something like that happens, that you're accusing someone of thieving, you're accusing someone of adultery, you're accusing someone of drinking alcohol and taking drugs, you need to bring evidence. And the evidence which the Sharia says when it comes to adultery and fornication is for Muslim men, witnesses, male witnesses, and for alcohol, for drugs, for thieving, there has to be 2 male witnesses who testify that, yes, this person has been thieving from the donations money, only then you will believe in him. But before that, it is totally impermissible for Muslims to even listen to that thing, because that becomes a slander. If something is not true, If people are making rumors of that, or he's thieving, he drinks alcohol, it's the right you have of the right of a Muslim brother, which is like you need to honor him, you should not degrade him. Never ever listen to these information. Never ever listen to these rumors. And unfortunately that's what happened. That's why there's hardly any unity and ijtihad amongst Muslims. Because what happens is that somebody says something and it's actually a false, it's a rumor, and it just kind of circles around. Then that person then gives another rumor about him, and there's hardly any kind of togetherness and any kind of unity in ijtihad. So I was saying that if these kind of information comes, always best to investigate, do tahqiq, get witnesses, who either testify that they've seen this happen, or like something has happened and so on. Only then you can listen to that particular individual. The next hadith, which I'm going to look at before we finish this week's lesson, is a hadith which can be found in Sunan Abu Dawood and also in Sunan Nasa'i, Sunan Ibn Majah, narrated by the companion Bara bin Azib al-Anhu. Now Bara bin Azib al-Anhu narrates that once his uncle, his maternal uncle, Abu Burda bin Niyar, was passing by him. And he had a flag, وَمَعَهُ لِوَاءُ, had a big massive flag. So the nephew, Bara bin Azib, he asked his maternal uncle, أَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ, where are you going? So he replied by saying, بَعَثَنِي النَّبِيُّ صلى الله عليه وسلم إِلَى رَجُلٍ تَزَوَّجَ إِمْرَأَةَ أَبِيهِ آتِيهِ بِرَأْسِهِ, which means that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has sent me to go to such a person who had married his stepmother. تزوج امرأة أبيه, who had married his stepmother, آتيه برأسه, to go and execute him and bring his head to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why it's mentioned in another hadith of Sunan Darmi, Sunan Ibn Majah, it says, فَأَمَرَنِي أَنْ أَضْرِبَ أُنُكَهُ وَآخُذَ مَالَهُ. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam ordered me to chop his head off, execute him, and also take all his belonging and take all his wealth. And let's look at this particular hadith. Now what we can gather from this particular hadith is the impermissibility of marrying your stepmother. i.e. the mother who basically your father, either while he was married to your mother, he married another woman, so basically he's got two wives, or like for example he divorced your mother, or your mother passed away and then he thereafter went and married someone else. Both situations, whether it's your your father's second wife whilst your mother is married to him, or afterwards when your mother either has been divorced by him or your mother passed away, your father went and married someone else. To marry your stepmother is something which is totally unlawful and haram. And this was very, very common within the Arabs in those days, during Zaman al-Jahiliyyah, during the days of ignorance, that whenever their father would pass away, the stepson would always marry the stepmother. It was common. It was considered to be an act of goodwill that the father passed away, let me now marry the stepmother so that I can look after her. So when Islam came, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited it by mentioning the verse, وَلَا تَنْكِهُوا مَا نَكَحَ آبَاؤُكُمْ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ, that one is not allowed to marry those women who his father has married. So this is something which is unlawful and haram, and we can see the severity of it, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent Abu Burda anhu with a flag. Now why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam send him with a flag? The flag in those days signified that basically this was like a certificate that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had definitely sent him. So what could happen is that anybody could just make up and say, oh, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent me to do this. Where's the proof? Where's the evidence? So the flag was there to show that, look, this is the evidence this is a certificate Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent me to go to such a person who had married his stepmother to go and execute him and bring his head to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now if we look at the last part of the hadith very quickly, وَآخُذَ مَالَهُ, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also ordered Abu Burda radiallahu anhu to execute him and also take that person's wealth. Now from here, just very quickly, I'm just going to mention a few things which we call in Arabic ta'zir bil mal, which means financial penalty. Can you financially punish someone? Obviously, just say for example, somebody is not abiding by the laws, so in an Islamic state you can punish him with a whip and so on. Obviously not in this country, but just say for example, in this country, can we financially punish someone? Just say for example, there's a student, and this normally happens in madrasa by the way, in the evening classes where students are not learning their sabaq or their lesson. So the teacher says, okay, if you don't learn your lesson, I'm going to fine you £5. Or if you don't attend classes, I'm going to charge you £10. Or if you don't do this, I'm going to charge you £20 and so on and so forth. Now the question is that, is it permissible to financially punish someone? Now according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah, he is of the view that it is impermissible to financially punish someone. Unlawful to financially punish someone, because Allah says, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ, which means that do not eat or take each other's wealth in an unlawful way. So basically to financially punish someone is actually considered impermissible according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi. However, one of his students, Imam Abu Yusuf rahmatullah, is of the view that the way to get around it is like, for example, you can take or financially punish someone, you can take the money from him, but after a few days, you can then return the money back to him, or with his consent or with his permission, you can then put it into the donation box, or you can take it, or you can use it for the madrasa and so on. Because sometimes what could happen is that the madrasa or the school or the Islamic institute who are teaching the kids and so on, they sometimes see that parents they take advantage in terms of they hardly send their children, or the children comes and they mess around, they break the the radiator or the light and these kind of things. So sometimes the madrasa or the institute, they have to be a bit strict on them. So the way you can be strict on them is that, okay, you can say to them, so if you do this, I'm going to charge you, I'm going to fine you, say £100. Now after you fine them, 2-3 days later, you can then go back to them and say that, look, here, take the money back. I just took it so that as an act of deterrence. So you can take the money back. Or with their permission or consent, if they give permission, then you can say, oh, if you want, I can put it into the lillah, I can put it into the donation box, which obviously will be benefit for us, the masjid, and will also be benefit for you in terms of thawab and reward. So that's the only way to get around it. But generally speaking, to financially punish someone, to take money from someone because of punishment, and that is something which is not allowed and not permissible in Islam. But for that individual, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told Abu Burda radiallahu anhu that you can financially punish him. Why? Because he had done such a severe crime, that he had basically, was marrying or had married his stepmother, which is totally gross, totally haram, totally unlawful. So therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that, look, if he did it in particular with the intention that it's something lawful and halal, that takes him out of the fold of Islam, hence his wealth and everything becomes lawful and permissible for Muslims to use. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,